Hi, this is Dr. Rios again talking about Texas politics and Texas policy. And so we're going to be covering a couple of items today. And so those are basically what's politics and what's policy. You've heard these words being batted around, especially during this election cycle. And so we're going to be kind of defining what they are and why they're important. So what is politics? What is policy? How do they converge? So we're going to be talking about that. So let me go ahead and pull up uh, my PowerPoint slides here. Hold on a second. Okay, share. And then we do this one here and share that one. Okay, and then we're going to be doing this one. Oops. Bear with me, bear with me. All right. Come on. As I said, I'm Dr. Rios, professor of political science, retired from Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi. And as I said a little bit ago, it's the election season, and there's a lot to talk about. And when you're talking about politics, and you're talking about policy, you're really talking about the political process. And so in this political process, it's divided up in many different ways. So when you're talking about the politics part, you're talking about the electoral process. When you're talking about the policy part, you're talking about the policy process. So let's talk about the politics, the electoral process first, the politics part first. Okay, so if you're saying, okay, well, what is politics? Well, politics is basically, this is one political scientist, and this is how he defined it. It's who gets what, when, and how. So you're really talking about who has the power to make these decisions. And you're saying, then the question is, okay, well, then what kind of decisions are they making? Well, it's the process that's going to determine how power and resources is money, because we're talking about our taxpayer money that's going to be going to different programs and how they're going to be distributed to society without violence. And that's kind of important right now because there's a lot of violence going on in our country. It's very worrisome, if you ask me. But anyway, so it's the process of who's going to get what, as what the definition says. How is it going to be distributed? Who's going to benefit from it? Who's going to be who's not going to benefit from it? Because there's always going to be winners or losers. So we're going to be talking about that. All right, so in this thing that we call the electoral process and this act of voting in our representatives for this democracy that we have to have a belief that we do have representative democracy, that we have a legitimate representative democracy, that the people that we vote in are the people that we want to represent us because we're the ones that vote them in. And that needs to be done through the vote that we're voting people in. This is a person that's going to represent me based on whatever criteria that you might have, and I'll talk about that in just a second. It's also the belief that there is political efficacy, and that's just the definition of that one is basically saying I value my political efficacy, saying my vote does count. And so many times people are saying, well, why vote? My vote doesn't count. But actually it does. There's only the presidential election the general election where you vote in for the president and the vice president, and that's the electoral college. But everybody's vote does count. Every single person's vote does count. As it is right now, it's so important. Our state elections are becoming more and more important. So whoever you vote in at the state level is going to be determining how we as Texans are going to have, what kind of benefits we're going to have or not, what type of laws that we're going to have, who is this going to benefit, who is it going to hurt. And that's kind of because of the Supreme Court rulings that have come down just recently, giving a lot of power back to the states. And that's called the states' rights argument. And that's a very conservative type of ideology. But the Supreme Court is very conservative right now. It's a judicial activist court right now. Okay, I use that term ideology. So let's talk a little bit about what ideologies are. Now, this is kind of a belief system that each party has. So it can be the conservatives or Republicans, or tend to be Republicans. Liberals tend to be Democrats. And there's some place in the middle. There's the moderates and the independents. So it's really like a spectrum. You're not real conservative or you're not real liberal. I would say that most people kind of fall in the middle and they're more moderate. And I'm going to be giving you some information about that. And so this role of ideologies kind of drives the types of laws that are going to be made. So let's talk about what each of these ideologies represent. I want to talk about the conservatives first, because this is the one that seems to be having we're having more difficulty trying to define what a conservative is, because of the way that the Republican Party is right now. It's not the traditional Republican Party that has been in the past. It's being occupied or taken over by an extreme element. So what I'm going to be giving you are what traditional principles are, and what a lot of the more establishment or the more moderate Republicans are trying to get back to at some point, but they're really struggling, to try to get this done. Okay, so basically, some of the beliefs or the principles, the characteristics for conservatives is that there needs to be limited government in business, and that's another way of saying is that we don't want to have a lot of government intervention in our businesses, unless not our business, but our businesses, unless it's going to benefit our business in some way. Conservatives tend to value have traditional family values, and this is where the pro-life movement comes in. That the family should be, mom, pop, 2.3 kids, traditional family values. They don't see that there's much room for anything else. And more than anything else, is personal responsibility. And so this is another way of saying, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Do not depend on the government to help you out. If you're having problems, if you're having issues, you go to your family, you go to the community, but don't go to the government. Do not ask the government to help you out. As opposed to the liberals, and the liberals are saying, well, maybe there should be some intervention in the economy if it is needed. Let me give you an example of this one. We just went through the pandemic. And so basically the country shut down, the economy shut down. And so the government intervention was basically, they were calling it stimulus money. And a lot of people got stimulus money. Not me, but a lot of people got stimulus money. And so they needed it because they didn't have jobs. I mean, the economy closed down, businesses shut down. So this is like one way that helped. Again, with the pandemic, all of these vaccines that are available, whether you took it or not, they're free because the government made it available to you. Even back, if you want to go farther back in 2008, and some of you may remember this and some of you may not remember this, but this is during that Great Recession where the economy was, we really did crash. We went into this recession. Well, it wasn't a depression where it crashed, but we were having a very serious recession, and they were calling it the Great Recession, where the government actually bailed out financial industry. They bailed out the mortgage industry. They bailed out the aviation industry. They bailed out the automotive industry. So, and that was started under George W. Bush while he was president. It was continued under Obama. So eventually there were loans that were given to these businesses to kind of do better, because that was what was needed at that time. That was what was needed at that time. Okay, another characteristic that the liberals have is that they're saying, well, not everybody is born with what they call a silver spoon in their mouth. And that's another way of saying is sometimes there's forces beyond your control that you are not able to have, like the best education, the best healthcare, the type of institutional or systemic disadvantages or racism that are existing in our country, and they have existed for a very long time. So under liberal ideology, the liberals say we should be able to provide an opportunity, and they call this social responsibility. That if people need help, and some of these some of this help comes in the form of education, that different types of grants are awarded, like the Pell Grants if you're very low income, other types of grants. That if you are provided the opportunity to do better in life, that you should be given that opportunity. And again, it's up to the person to take advantage of that opportunity and do something with that opportunity. Liberals also support have strong First Amendment rights. And the First Amendment rights are the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom of assembly, the freedom of the press. So all of those rights are sacrosanct to the liberals. They're saying, y'all should not mess with this. Okay, liberals tend to be pro-choice. So let me talk a little bit about that. A pro-choice does not mean pro-abortion. And I know a lot of times that's the way the argument is set up, but that's a false argument. Pro-choice means that you have the choice whether or not you want to get an abortion or not. Okay, the Supreme Court ruling, the Dobbs decision said, no, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. We're giving it back to the states, and the states are going to decide whether or not there's going to be any type of abortion laws in your particular state. So Texas has some of the strictest ones. Okay, so far so good. Okay, we'll talk more about that in another area, another section. Okay, well, what about the moderates and the independents? You know, most people fall in this category. We're not at these two extremes of this spectrum. And so a lot of times the moderates or the independents will say, you know, I'm going to vote based on the issue. And that's fine. You just have to know what the issues are. Maybe that's why I'm doing this. Or it can be, I'm going to vote based on the candidate because I like the candidate. Okay, that's fine. But then what do we know about the candidates? It's kind of hard to vote now because there's so much misinformation and disinformation. Like, what's really true? What's really true? What are you supposed to believe? It's a very tough time in our country right now. And so if you are moderate or independent, they consider these to be like swing votes. And right now they're looking at the Latino population to be the swing vote because they're saying Latinos are going to decide this election. Whether that's true, that's not true. Right now there's polling. I'm going to be giving you some information on polling in another section. But you can't always say these polls are absolute, that they are absolutely true, that they know what's going on. Are they a good reflection of what's going on? It's a snapshot in time. But the thing is, they're going to call you. They don't call cell numbers. They only call landlines. You may want to talk to them or you may not want to talk to them. They're missing this huge piece of the population, of the voting population, that the younger population, they don't even know what a landline is. They only have cell phones. Well, they don't call us cell phones. But anyway, so these are the swing voters, and this is the population that either party tries to swing over to their particular parties and to vote for their candidates. I want to show you this particular the chart. You know, Texas is known as a very, very red state. It's been a very red state since 2002, which is when it kind of went completely, over to the Republican side. It became a very red state. And if you look at these, this came from a textbook that I was using. I cited it at the end of this presentation. You see that men, by gender, men tend to be more conservative than women. So the red is the Republicans, the blue are the Democrats, and the gray are the moderates. If you look at it by ethnicity and race, African Americans tend to be much more moderate than what usually is out there in the media, because usually they say, oh, you know, African Americans, they tend to be very liberal, et cetera, et cetera. Here in Texas, that's not what this particular graph is showing. If you look at the Anglos, Anglos tend to be dominantly more conservative, 55% of the Anglos, and this is based on the 2020 election. If you look at the Asian American and the Latinos, there's more of an even split, like 30-30-30, within those two populations. But this is the interesting part right here, by generation. This particular, the Gen Z, these are the youngins, as I call them, like the students that I had. And we didn't really know how they were going to be voting because they had not yet voted. So the 2020 election was the first general election that they voted in. And if you look at these, between the Generation Z, the Millennials, and the Generation X, there's really not that much difference. It really starts to change as you get older. As the baby boomers, like me, I'm a baby boomer. Baby boomers tend to fluctuate more towards the conservatives. And then the silent generation, I think of that like the World War II vets. I mean, this silent generation is very conservative. So if you look at all of these and you're saying, well, is Texas really that conservative? What this is telling me is that really it's the older people that go out to vote. And that's kind of true. So with people that are older, people that are have higher levels of income, and people that are better educated tend to go out and vote at a higher rate than the others. The midterms are coming, so we'll see how that plays out. Okay, let's talk about public policy. So I talked to you about the electoral process, about voting people in, and it's going to be based on, who you vote into office, whether they're going to be conservatives or Republicans or Democrats and liberal somewhere within the spectrum. And so how does that translate into what is going to be happening in the state of Texas? And we call that public policy. And this is at the national level, this is how it's defined. It's the mechanism that's used to solve public problems, and it is based on ideology. So this is kind of the way that it works. If there's a problem that's going out there in the country, and if it's a big enough problem, if it's a salient enough problem, if it's an important enough problem, if it's affecting a lot of people, then maybe the government does need to be involved and to enact some type of legislation. That does not mean that government needs to be involved in everything. And what happens is that It's a dynamic process where there's many different people that are involved in making public policy, and there's many, many models of how policy is made. And that's just another way of saying we need a law to be passed. There's a problem. What kind of solution is there going to be to fix this law? Excuse me. And so through this thing called pluralism, and pluralism is basically different interest groups that are vying for to influence the legislature in some way. And so the way that they're trying to influence the legislature is to say, we want a policy to be designed, a law to be designed to benefit our particular membership. And so they're going to have a lot of different interest groups in this. And, sometimes you have more winners or more losers. Let me give you an example of this, of an interest group. Everybody knows what the NRA is, right? Well, we do not have good legislation in Texas. Like think about the AR-15s, right? We don't have that type of legislation because the NRA is a huge contributor to the politicians here in Texas. So they're not going to pass legislation that's not going to be beneficial to them. So we as people, as just the general public, do not have any say other than that. But what they're trying to do, these interest groups are trying to do, is they're trying to influence the way these laws are going to be coming out. So then the law is passed or it's enacted, and then it goes to some kind of public agency to write the rules and the regulations in order for these laws to be implemented. And an example of a public agency might be like the IRS or Social Security or Health and Human Services. So these are big organizations. Texas has these organizations at a smaller scale. And so there's this thing, goes from the federal to the state and then out to the local and to the people. So that part's called federalism. Okay, so how does it work here in Texas? Texas is different. I mean, it's different the way that we pass laws. In all of the models at the national level, the executive office or the president does not have like a sanctioned role to play in policymaking. He's only able to persuade. So Texas is different in this way. The governor is a very active player in the policy process. It doesn't just persuade. It's the governor. He has liaisons to help him deal with the legislature. But most importantly for the governor's position is that he appoints people to boards and commissions. And so the people that he appoints is going to have his ideology. So whenever the laws are passed by the legislature, and then they go to the governor to sign or to veto, and some laws still can go ahead, sign or to veto, then it goes to the public agencies, and they're the ones that are going to write the rules and the regulations in order to implement whatever law in the state of Texas. Now, the legislature itself, there's this thing called the legislative leadership, and there's two positions that you probably, or two offices, I should say, that you're probably unfamiliar with, and one is the lieutenant governor, and the other one is the Speaker of the House. The lieutenant governor runs the Senate. He's the head of the Senate. The Speaker of the House is the head of the House of Representatives in the state of Texas. And so they have committees that help them make the laws. And it's all of the work is done in these little committees. And it's each of these positions for the Senate and for the House that appoint people to the committees, and they appoint people to sit on these committees. And so if in the state of Texas, because it has what they call poor jurisdiction, if you want a law to pass, you will send it to a committee that's going to pass that law. And this is driven by the legislative leadership. If there's a law that they don't want passed, they send it to a committee that they know is going to kill the bill. So in that way, it's very different than it is at the national level. And again, we also have the business groups. Texas is business friendly. It's always been known as a very business friendly state. And so business groups do have a large role to play in the state of Texas. They call it the mortar that holds everything together. So if there's going to be a law that's going to be against the business interests, it's likely not to pass because they will try to block it. And they are a sanctioned player in the policy process. Okay, so then you should be asking yourself, well, then what about us? What about us? What about we, the people? This is the way that we can have our say. So the legislature meets every 2 years in odd years, and they're getting ready to meet in January. And so there are they can pass some laws, but they're kind of restricted from passing a lot of things without us having a say in what's going to be passed. And so this is done through the process of constitutional amendments. So what happens is that there needs to be, there's a proposal that says we're going to be changing something. A lot of times it has to do with money. A lot of times it has to do with social issues. Some of the constitutional amendments that have been passed would be like the income tax. We have no income tax in the state of Texas. That was passed a while back. Texas is marriage in Texas is between a man and a woman. Well, that was passed, but then we had the Supreme Court ruling saying no. You know, the equity clause saying there will be everybody can marry we will have same-sex marriage. That's kind of like nebulous right now. We're not sure where that's going to go in the state of Texas. We have like funding for higher K through 12 education, and a lot of it has to do with education because of the way the money is split up. So there's some money that the governor handles that's not in the budget. And so they're saying, well, you know what, we need to have more money for like the K through 12 education. So governor, we need to get money out of what they're calling the rainy day fund and put it into the legislature, the budget for the legislature, so we can do that. So they're asking the people, will you approve this? Others have to do with property taxes. So these have to go, so a lot of it has to do like with money type of things. So it's 2/3 of the House of Representative members and 2/3 of the Senate. And then it goes to us and it comes out in a special election. They usually just call it a constitutional amendment election. And so we have to vote it in. Well, unfortunately, it's got the very low, very low voter turnout, somewhere between maybe 4% and 6%. So it's people that are like kind of paying attention to what's going on that actually go out and vote. Our Constitution today and these constitutional amendments, this is not the best way that we can do it, but the Constitution that we have at this particular point in time is from 1876. It's not serving our purpose, but that's all that we have. That's what we have to work with. So, okay, so I hope that this gives you like an idea about how the politics works. People that we vote in, that's important. People who we vote in. And then how that translates into the laws that are going to be coming out in any state within the state of Texas, or with our state of Texas, I should say. Okay, so I hope this gives you a better understanding of all that. And so I thank you for your patronage then.